Hello and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining me. My name is Schickler. I am the regulatory reporter for Europe at CoinDesk, based in Brussels. I can't promise, like previous people, that we'll speak in the language of Shakespeare. I'm not that poetic, but we will speak in English. So I hope you have your headsets ready, those who need them. I'm joined today by Joachim Schwerin, who is a principal economist at the European Commission in the DG GROW, which is the Economic Growth Department, and by Neal of Bem.builders for what I hope will be a fascinating discussion on the metaverse. This is the Web3 Leaders Forum. It's not just the Crypto Leaders Forum, so it's great that we're exploring a bit about the future. Now I'm going to look a bit more closely at our title of our panel later, but I just want to start by going back a bit. I remember kind of watching the future of technology programs in the 1990s, and everyone was obsessed with virtual reality, and it was very exciting, and it's still very exciting, this idea that you could go into a virtual world with your little helmet. So, you know, the metaverse may be the future, but it's been the future for some time, and it still hasn't quite caught on yet. I just want your opinion on, you know, is the metaverse still the future of technology, or is it kind of an idea that could have happened but never did? Neal.
Hello, everyone. Is the metaverse the future? I guess not the overall future, but at least a part of it. You're right, it's been 2 years that everyone is talking about the virtual worlds that people sum up into the word metaverse. I used to say the metaverse doesn't exist or yet, because we all have the idea of a Ready Player One kind of a platform. Today we're more talking about virtual worlds. There are plenty of them. All of them have different facilities, specificities, tech features. And I believe today we can discuss of what is the future of the virtual worlds. And it's true that they will be part of it. It's true that on them today, millions of people connect, interact socially. The engagement, the activities are plenty on different industry, from retail to art. So yes, virtual worlds are part of the future.
Joachim.
I would agree to that, and at the same time, the spectrum of what is the future and what is the past is on the one hand side very big, and on the other hand side quite close. I'm an economic historian, so I tend to see things in longer term perspective. And when you look at fundamental concepts, decentralization, we had that in Europe for at least 2,500 years. We are basically a continent of decentralization, where you have groups interacting with other groups quite spontaneously. We are discussing DAOs, where basically we have the concept of cooperative at local level in communities in Europe for at least 1,000 years. And the digital counterpart of that is nothing different in terms of governance from the physical cooperative. The thing is that indeed technology enables DAOs to scale and to become global much easier than in the past. And this is, I think, the key thing about technology. Technology is a facilitator if it is applied properly. So virtual worlds, it has already been said, we have many of them. We have many different ones. We have at least 4, as we see it, completely different groups of virtual worlds from industry, from the gaming community, from social platforms, from other things being developed in parallel. And we have to be a little bit cautious and clear on terminology. Because at the end of the day, from my experience, being in the space quite a bit, I don't see anything new that metaverses or virtual worlds would create. But in my opinion, what virtual worlds do is that they again, and it's already very fast, but they are again hugely accelerating the pace of innovation, because so many elements can come now together that go much more into the immersive nature of what virtual worlds are. And this, in a way, is a game changer. I mean, we've been discussing that with a lot of people in this space, and it's not only about the fact that you now can better integrate and more seamlessly, hopefully, the real world and the virtual world, but also the depth of the technical development, including also then artificial intelligence at a certain moment, means that the whole conception that we have of the world changes. And this is creating not only, I would say, legal and economic aspects, but this is also creating social and health and psychological effects that in the metaverse we see them differently from traditional parts, because the integration goes so much deeper. So it's a very, very fascinating topic, but we still can, in my opinion, fully analyze it with traditional concepts, because indeed we should not have the idea that anything is now brand new. We have the concepts to discuss it, but we need to be much more consistent and coherent in discussing what a metaverse or what the metaverses are in order to understand them, which is a huge challenge given the speed of innovation.
So maybe not a step change itself, but something that's ready to happen now with the technology that's available and that could produce a step change in the economy. You know, if this is going to happen, you know, I guess my next question is, what will it look like? Because we've got various competing visions. You yourself referred to metaverse. The title of our panel is Metaverses. So, you know, one obvious question for me is, will there be one of these virtual worlds, or will there be many different ones, one for each kind of company that gets involved in this sector? You know, how centralized, decentralized will it be in reality? I mean, we obviously saw Facebook renaming itself Meta, which kind of makes it look like it's going to be a big tech takeover. But, you know, for a lot of people, this is supposed to be about crypto. It's supposed to be about decentralization. It's supposed to be about having a different model than we had for Web 2.0. Neal, do you have a vision for what this will look like?
I think we all already mentioned the fact that there are different virtual worlds. You are referring to a decentralized one when you're talking about blockchain-connected platforms. You referred as well to Meta, the Horizon world from Facebook. From the fact that it's Facebook, it's not decentralized the way a huge community, and especially in this space, we agree or we see as a future. I think there is different layer. First of all, you need to understand that all metaverse are not the virtual reality platform you access to. Virtual reality means you need a hardware, you need a mask, VR, AR, if we're talking about augmented reality or mixed reality. Obviously, this will come from a big tech, because you need to develop the hardware, right? And the possibility of selling them, making the price accessible for the most of us, it's not there yet, right? It's very expensive today. VR mask cost a few hundreds euro. And we're not even talking about a few thousand euro of the coming one from Apple. Now, we also know that today, millions of people connect to what we can call virtual worlds, because they are there live, in synchrone, it's persistent, and this, we're talking about free gaming platform like Fortnite or Roblox, we all know them, and this is accessible from a simple smartphone or computer. Now there is also the layer of software, and this software can be accessible. So when we talk about the metaverse, we need to divide, are they decentralized or not? Are we talking about virtual reality worlds or just simple spatial or immersive experience? And this is where, for me, big tech, but also decentralized world happens together.
I think that is already very clear in terms of explanation, and I think to add on that, from our perspective, there is nothing specific that you need in order to be in the metaverse. As we have heard, and that is not only for the gaming community, but for example in the manifold industry applications, for example with digital factories that are already emerging, where there is no VR glasses or whatever being applied, also for data security reasons and for many others. So you have even two-dimensional virtual worlds in the gaming community, not all of that is three-dimensional. So to have any sort of fixed definition of what virtual worlds are, relying on a piece of hardware or relying on a specific aspect of software or whatever tool is wrong. What you have is, when you bring together the real and the digital world, indeed, as we have discussed, a huge variety of concepts as such. And when you approach that from a societal perspective, I'm not saying a public perspective, but that plays a role, but a societal perspective, in my opinion, some of them are more relevant than others. I think that it is a complete misunderstanding and in fact a dead-end road to think that you can have our Internet 2.0 and just put some tools on top of that and then you have the Web3 or you have a virtual world. That is a PR trick of the big techs that are still dominating the current space, but that is not the future. The future, in my opinion, is what is underpinning blockchain as a decentralized space, and that is actually the history we gave it from the very beginning. Blockchain, as we know it now, emerged with the white paper on Bitcoin at the end of 2008, at the same moment that the financial crisis had its deepest moment with the insolvency of Lehman Brothers. And it was a way forward to show that whereas all the risk is in centralized systems, now the decentralized solutions can offer opportunities and a way out of this problem. And this is why we from a public sector have jumped so quickly on the technology. Why we have 7 years after it came into existence already declared that this is an innovation priority in Europe for all the policy fields. The first time ever that we had a technology that we approved of and supported so quickly. And we are building that. We are not only talking, we are building huge real economy infrastructures, for example, to detect fake products. We have also financial regulation in place. We are developing that space, but the idea behind that is that it is decentralization. And when we now talk about Web3, which is of course related to virtual worlds, but not identical with that, that for me is the way forward, but Web3 is an empowerment bottom-up of everyone in the society to live according to their preferences. And this is the complete opposite of what we see currently in Web 2.0. So when you discuss now the meta type of metaverse or anything else that comes from a centralized perspective, I of course see that it exists, but to be very clear, it has no societal relevance in my opinion. And it should not have any significant future. And I think, therefore, it's very important to focus on the other aspects that have already been mentioned, because we have 4 billion gamers in the world that are the key source of innovation in the crypto sphere, whether it's financial or non-financial. And this is where actually also the concepts of virtual worlds will again be further developed, and that will have to be facilitated in a specific way. But I think when we now refer to our communication that we put out last week, this is basically, it's not at all a regulation, it's not at all the idea to regulate something, but it is to understand what is happening in the space, to follow it up in a positive and productive way in order to help the developers and the enterprises to indeed develop the space, to scale. But it's a completely different mind frame than we have in the traditional digital space, if I would call it like that.
Okay. I mean, you made the comparison with Web 2 and how this might sort of avoid some of the issues of Web 2. I know for a lot of policymakers, there are also some policy challenges with the internet, as we know it at the moment, about illegal content, counterfeit goods, intellectual property online, kind of takedowns of and how you create kind of a lawful space online just as you do offline. It did take quite a while, I think, for legislators to get to grips with that. We've just seen a suite of laws coming out from the EU on digital markets, on digital services, and so on. Are there similar issues there? Are there going to be similar issues there in the metaverse, for example, about how you stop illegal content or unlawful behavior or unfriendly behavior? And what do you see regulation or moderation or some kind of cooperative practices being the way forward?
I can go if you whatever. Different level again. Of course, when we're talking about property and traceability of assets, here the blockchain plays a very important role, and this is why today we are talking about not users or players, but owners. When you own your own asset, obviously it makes it more easy to control, and that's why also we're talking about creators economy. It's because people who create own it and then can be independent about that. About the regulation and the role, what I find fascinating in this virtual world, if we're talking about the one we're referring to millions of people, like mostly gaming virtual worlds, it's interesting because this younger generation, they almost act as a very autonomous community. They have their own moderators, they have their own way of screening great and bad behaviors, and if you go to a forum, we're talking a lot about Discord as a social media dedicated to this community. If someone does something wrong, automatically you will see everyone spotting the person, banning the person, and kind of working as their own way of moderators. And that's also why we call some of them mods. In this community, they are independent. It's not a job. Usually these kids, because they are still very young, do it just because they are involved and engaged with the community. And this is lovely to observe because, of course, regulation will be needed on a governmental levels, and this is also what some of the platforms help to define in terms of features. If I take the example, 1 year ago, there was someone who mentioned being harassed in the virtual world, and you would see now a lot of these virtual worlds having kind of a shield, like a zone where you can't be approached by another avatar of 2 or 3 meters, so you make sure you're protected. So these are features, but on the other hand, the community also help to regulate the great and bad behavior. So I find this fascinating.
Okay, so maybe a role for self-policing. Do you think that will be enough?
I think that will be completely enough. And I think that, of course, there are certain pieces of regulation to apply. But let's face it, I mean, when I said that in virtual worlds there's nothing new except the immersive nature, that also means that all the issues that we had in the world before, be it real or digital, still apply. But with a couple of safeguards. First, the crypto space is much less exposed to crime than traditional financial markets. And that is not me who is saying that, that is the statistics from all the companies that are trying to detect crime and fake it. Look at the last Chainalysis report, crypto crime from a very low level down 2/3 compared to last year. That's because of the transparency of blockchains. Then there is the self-control and the self-governance of these spaces that works very well. What it basically does, in my opinion, this space, is that it finally, after 250 years of the rise of intermediaries that have in the meantime lost any knowledge of why they're actually there, we finally get back to the situation that communities will be enabled and are regulating themselves. And that is something that we have not learned. We have learned that when we spend money and do investments, we ask our banks or we ask our fund manager. Or when we do anything else, we ask someone who tells us what to do. And this is a completely wrong way. And we are now in a situation that finally communities can come together to find governance mechanisms that have actually existed a long time before, but that have somehow been forgotten, to come together to the space. That doesn't mean that we needn't regulate anything, but let's put things in perspective. I give you an example. We have a recent case in Belgium where someone was listening to some AI-fed bot telling him to kill himself, and that person killed himself. So what does it say about AI? What does it say about society? In my opinion, it says nothing about AI. I mean, you have people, you could as well walk on the street and take a random person and say, kill yourself. If that person kills yourself, it's very sorry. It will have a psychological problem probably or whatever, but it's not the problem of the system as such. If I am going into a specific space and I'm investing in some sort of NFT where you get very limited content, but the business model of the NFT provider is publicly saying that I want to get stinkingly rich and I exploit you, and you say that, wow, that's great, and you buy the stuff, and then you get nothing in value, you do not run to your government and say, oh, that guy cheated on me. You should ask yourself on why did you believe any of that? So I think that the self-empowerment of people and communities must be much higher. That being said, there are spaces where regulation does play a role. And we have heard that in a panel before, for example, on banks moving into the crypto space. And someone has said that in France there is a little issue indeed, because the banks need to find their role. Yes, I attended a conference in Frankfurt last week on digitized securities, where we had 300 bank representatives in one room. And the German system has changed quite considerably over the last couple of months to enable a lot of these things and moving forward. I think there again, it shows the effect that regulation has. The same applies to the MiCA regulation, the same applies to other regulation. But we should please not think that every problem of society that we have anyway, just because it is somewhere present in crypto, needs new regulation. At the moment, we do not need new regulation. We do not have new regulation in the pipeline. We need the space to develop. We need to educate people. We need them to experiment and work with that. And we need to have confidence that those people that will replace us in 10 to 20 years, which is the young generation, is right now learning how to build their societies. They will be different from our societies, and thank God they are.
Very inspirational. I mean, just to zone in on one area of regulation that I've often heard talked about in the context of the metaverse is privacy. Now, the EU already has rules on privacy, the data protection regulation, but we're talking about people wearing a device, a helmet, eyeglasses, whatever that can suck up all the information, everything you see, maybe everything you think and everything you feel as well. It might take a guess about. We're talking about a kind of step change in the amount of data that might be collected about your personal life if you're kind of constantly connected to this alternative reality. And I've heard a lot of online rights groups say this is different from what we already see on the internet, and maybe it needs a different legal framework, one that's stronger. Do you think this is completely different, and when is the moment when kind of legislators, lawmakers are going to need to think about that, do you think?
I think Joachim just mentioned about how the blockchain plays a role into data privacy. Only talking about the experience in the metaverse, I see also this duality between if you connect to your avatar and to other people through the only system of the blockchain, which gives you a complete anonymous, you can ask the question, what if someone acts wrongly? How can you track this person? How can you end up mentioning about this person? So I think this is where regulation will play. Do we go in full mode of you are existing in a virtual world through an avatar and a pseudo, and there is no way to connect to your physical identity because we consider that privacy of data is important? And this is where I think European market is very interesting, because through GDPR,
data protection, yeah.
What an Eldorado for people who want to have this ownership. And maybe this is where Europe, and France included, can play a role into making the metaverse a safe place for any avatar with a human person behind.
Precisely. And when people say that MiCA is the first piece of regulation in the crypto world, I always reply that GDPR is the first regulation in the crypto world, because everything that we do on crypto and on blockchain is built on data, and how we see data is built on how we see the individual in relation to the communities or collectives where the individual operates. That's the starting point. It's the starting point for decentralization and bottom-up. And there Europe has a strong role, not only since the GDPR, but also before. I think that's a little bit our mentality in that space. I am, of course, much concerned if people again come to centralistic solutions. At the moment, there are big discussions on the digital product passports and other things. So in theory, you can create huge amounts of data and already now track and trace basically everything, and look at then reporting on eco requirements, on fighting against child labor or forced labor, or on any other thing where basically you need to, in the future, be sure that you avoid certain things. But of course, we have, in my opinion, a lot of digital tools already to secure certain things. We are talking, first of all, very much regarding blockchain discussion on what is on-chain, what is off-chain. How do we use oracles? What will be, I think, the role of interfaces? How can we secure data according to the directions with zero-knowledge proofs or soul-bound tokens? I mean, there's so much innovation in this space where I think that a lot of people are already not only talking about that, but developing that. We will have the technologies to safeguard, to a very large extent, I think, that data will be kept private and secure if we want that as a society, which I think we should. But of course, there are always those people that come again from top down that want to control everything, either politically or because they are big techs. And that brings us again back to the Web2 discussion. So the way out is there. Privacy and data protection are indeed the key. But we've seen it with the COVID pass. The only thing that someone, when you cross a border, needs to know whether it is green or red. There's no other information needed. That can be secured by the technology. So if we build a society like that, I think we are in safe waters. Otherwise, probably we won't.
Okay, we're running to the end of our time here. I could talk about all this all day. I guess my final question, just very quickly, people often bemoan that Europe missed out on Web2, doesn't host any of the GAFAs or the big tech companies. Do you think Europe has what it takes to lead on the metaverse?
With the help of the GAFAM? You're talking about?
With European companies and European innovation.
Yeah, but I think we, in a way, answered to this question through all the ideas of a right balance between a big tech and regulation for government, the auto-regulation from the communities, but with a complete freedom, because we also know that regulation tends sometimes to break on the evolution and the progress. So I think this is the ownership of the metaverse from the government. It's not realistic. And on the other hand, you also need, specifically talking about GDPR, this regulation to make a place safer and I would say more realistic for the new communities, the new generation. I think all of this discussion should also be considered through the mindset of we're talking about the Gen Alpha. These kids who are native from the environment, they consider their virtual appearance as important as them in the physical world. They spend money, they interact socially, and these kids do this natively. So we need to educate them as well, and we need to have the right frame for them. So I think it's a right balance between government and big techs. Yeah.
I can only say that thanks God, we've missed out on the GAFAs, because in 10 years' time that will be history. I think we have said that before. We have all that power from the people bottom up. Now it's the young generation, but the young generation has the privilege of thinking that everything that they do is new, but in fact, to a large extent, it is not, because people that have self-organized themselves and have created governance systems across our history in Europe have applied very similar mechanisms. It only looked differently, but now it is digitized. So that will be the future. And I think there Europe will be leading if we refrain from the idea that, again, we have to introduce centralization through the back door. We have to trust the technology. More importantly, we have to trust the people. We see that in all other parts of the world, that blockchain is a game changer for every type of society in continents that have long not been taken seriously. So they see the concrete benefits. We fight a little bit behind because we still have a big legacy system that tries to prevent a lot of things. We will get around that, and if we manage that, then I think we are in the lead, but we are not imperialists. I mean, everyone who shares our ideas is welcome to do so, and the market will drive that forward. Europe can play a very big role in this.
Great. A note of conditional optimism to end our panel. Neal Robert, Joachim Schwerin, I'm Jack Schickler. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.